So let's talk about some of the most powerful and auto-include Space Marine units out there in Warhammer 40k, why they're so good on the tabletop, and how they tend to get played in top army lists. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines, and in this video we'll go over not one but two slightly different top 10s for units in the Codex to talk about what's doing well in Astartes army lists right now. As it goes, Space Marines are having a fairly good time of it in tournaments right now. Win rate's around 48%, which is fairly well balanced, though admittedly that does hide quite a bit of diversity with them. They're having really quite a lot of top event wins and high placings, so doing very well at the tops of grand tournaments, though as ever with Space Marines there can be quite big differences between a fully optimised list and a typical player's collection. Compared with how they've been throughout the majority of 10th edition though, they're in a fairly good spot, multiple strong and viable options to play Space Marines on the tabletop, and a good list played well can absolutely be one of the strongest things in the game. For detachments being used for the Space Marines at the moment, the Shadowmark Talon is probably the single strongest one. The Raven Guard's unique Vanguard detachment has a fairly unusual and very different playstyle to the vast majority of Space Marine lists out there. Beyond that, Gladius Task Force remains the most popular, but otherwise there's quite a bit of variety. Stormlance, Forgefather Seekers, Ironstorm and Firestorm all doing well enough, and at least a few people using Vanguard, Librarius or the Spearpoint Task Force. I was interested to see what was doing well for the Space Marines right now, and for that to put them in a slightly more objective order. I took a look at 25 competitive lists that have done well at recent tournaments, generally ones that have gone 4 wins to 1 loss or better, and took a look at just how many times each datasheet had appeared in those lists. The biggest issue with that though is that the Shadowmark Talon has quite such a different army composition to just about anything else Space Marine. Lots of players going for one particular well-proven tournament list like this. It felt like it might make the list not particularly useful to non-Shadowmark players if it's quite so dominated by these units and very little else getting a look in. For that reason I thought we'd sort of split the top 10 in half a bit. First go through a top 10 of units excluding Shadowmark, so basically looking at all the other detachments which have a bit more of a wide variety of units in them, and then add the Shadowmark list into the data to see how that changes things, obviously quite heavily in favour of all the things that are auto-include in Shadowmark Talon. As ever, if you are looking to pick up any of the Space Marine miniatures mentioned in the video, feel free to check out the channel's affiliate discount retailers linked down in the video description. They can save a bit of money versus Games Workshop, and any purchases through these links specifically help to support Auspex Tactics. A big thank you to anyone using them. Getting into it properly though, and for honourable mentions for the non-Shadowmark Talons lists, there's really quite a massive amount of units that are played in some army lists but not all. After several waves of balance passes, really quite a lot of the Space Marine datasheets fall into being interesting and usable, really quite good in the right detachment potentially, though not necessarily for every single army. 4 army lists use either the Lieutenant's Judiceer or Repulsor Executioner, 5 use Outriders, Eradicators, Inceptors, the regular Repulsor or the Vindicator. Then getting into 6 lists you can see how many Salamanders lists there were, as we have both Adrax, Agaton, Vulcan Hestan and the Infernus squad here. 6 lists also made use of the Vanguard Veterans, often with a fighty character, Incursors to mark targets, and the Gladiator Lancer for heavy-hitting anti-tank. Then just outside of the top 10, 3 datasheets placed joint 11th. Marneus Calgar is awaiting a new datasheet, but the one with the Victrix Honour Guard is still pretty excellent. He's typically fielded with company heroes and just makes an all-around fighty and scary unit. Big hitting damage 3 melee, plus a lot of good attacks from his Victrix Guard. They can potentially tank some hits with some high saves that the company heroes don't get as well. The squad can move fast and advance and charge innately, and if Calgar's the warlord so Guilliman isn't in the list, then you can farm a command point per turn. Though that's not going to be an advantage to a whole bunch of Ultramarine lists, it's quite such a popular and game-changing model, it means he tends to get played more. Also on joint 11th we have the Impulsor, the Primaris Battlefield Taxi. It's a cheap 80 points for an 11 wound transport. There's enough room for 7 models in it, meaning that it's a particularly favoured one for Bladeguard Veterans, often led by Judiceer or maybe Adrax Agaton. Being a transport as well means it's particularly well favoured in the Salamanders and their detachments, and interestingly enough, in the current meta it seems that quite a few people are choosing the Iron Hail Sky Talon array for extra shots. Perhaps not a bad one if you're expecting a bunch of Eldari out there in the meta. The Shield Dome is popular as well, and the others are both usable too. Then finally for honourable mentions outside of the top 10 there's the Ballistus Dreadnought. 7 lists of the 25 took that as well, and for 150 points you get 2 big heavy las cannon shots, plus 2 missiles that can swap out to frag mode if needed, and they're generally going to hit fairly accurately as well with big inbuilt rerolls. For the points cost it's fairly sturdy as well. 12 wounds at toughness 10 with a 2+ save means it's going to need some focus fire to bring them down, and like a lot of the Space Marine gun tanks they often get fielded in multiples. Into the top 10 proper though, and first up we have the Land Raider variants. I did choose to lump these together, more feeling like they're varying by war gear choice more so than by datasheets. They cost between 220 and 270 points, and either way you get a 16 wounds toughness 12 behemoth with a 2+ save, really quite hard to take down and particularly efficient for Armour of Contempt. The Land Raider is particularly well favoured by assault troops. You can move 10 or 12 inches up to the enemy, then have the squad jump out and charge, and they're very likely to stay nice and safe before that as the transport's so tough. They're often seen around transporting Bladeguard, though other combos can go in them. The Land Raider Redeemer still seems to be the single most popular, and particularly so in Salamanders where you might have Vulcan re-rolling wound rolls for it. The regular Godhammer Land Raider is seeing a fair bit more play though, now it went down to 220 points. It is quite a nice mix of fairly cheap, very sturdy, and a bit of anti-tank fire. Before we move onwards and up the list, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in ObjectiveMarkers.com. They're a UK-based maker of faction-themed 40k objective markers, that ship out to a fair few places around the world. Their main offering, surprisingly enough, are faction-themed objective markers, fairly common 40k accessories. The idea is that they're a see-through silicon disc. In the centre there's a 40mm circle marked out to represent the objective, and then around that there's a 3-inch scoring zone, so you can really easily see whether your miniatures are in range or not. Being see-through means that you can still see the table underneath it. They're aimed to be thin, not to disrupt models standing on the edges of them, and the different designs try and add a little bit of faction-specific theme without being too obtrusive. The typical offering is £30 or $42 for 6 of these things. They do have a generic one with a sort of channel merch Auspex design, or very nice for scanning the midboard objectives regardless of which army you're playing. Beyond that though, they've got a whole bunch of faction themed ones appropriate enough for Chaos, the Greenskins, or various Xenos. Golden Guardians, Power Armoured Warriors, Space Swarms, or plenty more. They do have a bunch of new designs out. In any case, check them out in the video description if you'd like to take a look at their designs, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. They do have some other things on offer, like some terrain bases. Getting back to it though, and placing 9th, we have the Infiltrators. They are in 9 out of the 25 Space Marine army lists. They've been a big staple for the vast majority of 10th edition, really not doing so much damage with their slightly weedy bolters, but being super helpful for winning the mission. In particular, their Omni Scramblers mean that enemies can't deep strike within 12 inches of them, and that makes them kind of great for holding the home field objective. You can guarantee that units don't come in within 6 inches of them for any of that have that rule, and a relatively low investment squad can screen out a vast amount of the table. Otherwise, they can of course infiltrate, and if screening out reserves in the backfield isn't a big deal in any given matchup, you could use them in the midboard in the same way as other infiltrate style units and have a bit of variation as to how you play them. Otherwise, it doesn't hurt that they're just a little bit harder to kill than the average Space Marine. The Helix Gauntlet means that you have a 6+ feel no pain, which isn't absolutely enormous, but does kind of hurt the efficiency of things like damage 2 weapons that would usually go through them super fast. When they tend to get used in army lists, it's often just a single unit of 5. And it feels like for their battlefield role, they do have a bit of competition and overlap with their roles, both for intercessors to hold the home field and scouts to do infiltrating, so you might just be a tiny bit less likely to see all of them together. Next up, in an 8th place, taken in 10 out of these 25 army lists, is the Redemptor Dreadnought. Being up as a common Space Marine staple again, it definitely is a return to form for this one, and it does seem to be pretty solely due to having the points decrease for it. It got a fairly solid points cut down to 195 points. It did feel a bit on the costly side before that to me. Redemptor Dreadnoughts are just notably tough, 12 wounds at toughness 10 with a 2+ save, but they also get the -1 damage rule, and it means that anti-tank weapons will likely need to do a bit more work to bring them down, but it means they're absolutely enormously tough against damage 2 weapons, particularly good against certain things like say plasma fire or all manner of elite melee units that have damage 2 attacks. Those kind of units might well jump in and then just say half kill the Redemptor Dreadnought or bounce completely. The Redemptor doesn't have absolutely enormous standout damage given it pays for that durability, but still it's just quite general purpose and pretty well capable of chipping away at targets no matter what you fire it at. Typically people use the Macroplasma Incinerator. That's very nice with boosted oath of moment with a +1 to wounds. It's also great against elites, and then the Onslaught Gatling Cannon and Storm Bolters and Icarus Pod can really chip in against infantry. They're often taken in multiples and might just make you a little bit more tempted to take a Tech Marine in the army with these. Restoring wounds when the wounds are quite this annoying to take off can be quite a big deal. Next up, and placing in 7th, we have the Bladeguard Veterans. Still very popular despite a small points rise in the last balance update, 80 points for 3 of them and 170 for 6. The Bladeguard are a 3 wound elite infantry unit with a 4+ invulnerable save, so at least take a little bit of general purpose firepower to bring down. They have a touch of heavy bolt pistol shooting, and then mastercrafted power swords in melee, 4 attacks at strength 5 and damage 2, potentially with inbuilt reroll 1s to hit. They can change that to reroll 1s for invulnerable saves if they're attacked first and you're hoping to stop them getting wiped out. The strength 5 and damage 2 profile is one that takes buffs really well, particularly anything that can help them wound better. So really enjoy boosted oath of moments, lethal hits, lance, or reroll wound rolls in any form, some of which could be picked up either by characters or stratagems. In army lists, people are still going for the big units of 6 of them. It's usually 6 plus a Judas here to give them fights first and a little bit more quality melee. Fights first just means that they can be a real problem to deal with some armies, as you'd charge them and then they'd get to hit you before, potentially killing a lot of elite infantry. It also means they'll be an extra nasty heroic intervention threat. Otherwise, in Salamanders, they often get led by Adrax Agaton. He just ups their damage in a huge way with reroll wound rolls in the units plus his own melee, and occasionally that combo might get paired with a lieutenant as well. They only move 6 inches and are quite valuable, so it can be well worth buying a transport for them. They tend to work quite well in an Impulsor if you've just got the one attached character. But as we've seen, Land Raiders are really quite popular, and Adrax squad in a Redeemer is a bit of a staple for the Salamanders. Next up and joint with the Bladeguard or 11 selections are the Company Heroes. This one's the more recent 10th edition Primaris Command Squad, 4 really quite chunky Space Marine mini characters with 4 wounds apiece, and also at -1 to wound when they're guarding a character. For 100 points, the unit's overall threat isn't terrible. They get a little bit of shooting with a couple of guns, extra OC with the standards, and the company champion has a bit of melee threat with his power sword. Typically they tend to be found either backing up Marneus Calgar or Vulcan Hestan, though other options are possible. You could go with Corsaro Khan or Uriel Ventris perhaps. I think at least one list used each of those. Calgar works well with his Victrix Honor Guard and the overall -1 to wound, making that unit really quite obnoxious to kill. And Vulcan Hestan just wants something to protect him while he marks units for death and stays alive in the mid-board with his big OC. They do perhaps feel a bit more chapter specific than some of them though. Next up in 5th place with 12 selections we have the Jump Intercessors, 90 points for 5 of them and 170 for 10. It does feel quite nice to see Space Marine this with really quite a wide diversity of models. Even the 5th most popular choice, at least outside of Raven Guard, doesn't even seem to be quite considered enough to be auto-include in more than half lists. Jump Intercessors are really quite an efficient utility unit though. 90 points for 5 of them is the way they often tend to be fielded, and that gets you a unit of Space Marines that moves fast with 12 inches and fly, and hits hard enough in combat to bully their equivalents quite well, getting mortal wounds on the impact hits, a bunch of chainsword attacks, plus a power fist and some plasma pistol attacks as they go in. They have quite a bit of value and also happen to be a relatively cheap unit that can deep strike as well. So it could be a reasonable enough choice to keep in reserve to do some secondary objectives, and if they can do that while remaining fairly safe and then doing some charging against the enemy after, all well and good. They generally tend to get taken as either 1 or 2 units of 5 of them, though some lists do choose to go big and try and make them work as more mainline damage dealers. For the bigger unit squad role though, they get a lot more rivalry with the Vanguard Veterans. Next up and in 4th place we have the Primarch himself, Roboute Guilliman. It seems that 13 out of the 25 army lists outside of Shadowmark Talon took the Primarch of the Ultramarines. He can work quite well on a whole bunch of different flavours of lists, often being paired with at least some heavy tank fire support though. Guilliman's really quite a big central and game-changing miniature, hard to attack in the first place, gaining lone operative next to Space Marine infantry, and when he can attack him he still has a pretty formidable stat line and the ability to revive on death for the first time on a 3+, meaning that it's not usually going to be a great idea to massively overcommit to bring him down. Earlier in the game he can add load to a Space Marine list with his command abilities, giving you a discounted stratagem within 12 inches, or very nice with powerful ones available to the Space Marines, and then also the Master of Battle to allow you to have 2 Oath of Moment targets, moving on to get the buff against the second one after you've destroyed the first. Perhaps slightly in the mid to late game he can commit with his melee as well, which of course is enormously formidable. Huge attacks with the Emperor's Sword and Hand of Dominion depending on your targets. Overall an absolutely enormous investment at 340 points, and he is going to be a pretty defining model for each list that he's in, but certainly judged to be well worth the price of admission, and looks like a bit more so than Calgar these days. Ranking 3rd and we have the Space Marine Scout Squad, 70 points for 5 of them with cheap efficient Astartes Infiltrators, and Scout Squads were used by at least 14 out of the 25 lists, Infiltrate units have pretty great value all of their own. They can start on the mid-board objectives, do early game secondaries that need you to be up the board in the midfield, and potentially mess with enemy units in the early game if it makes sense to either deal damage or move block. The actual scout keyword helps them get the best of both worlds. They can pull back a bit if the enemy gets first turn, or potentially move up and be aggressive if you have first turn and it makes sense. And for their points cost, they don't have terrible damage output as well. They should be able to skirmish quite well with their rival units, and people really do take a big mix of different war gear with them. Both range and melee loadouts are pretty viable. Most take the chainsword and the sergeant, given that that has an extra attack. The sniper's fairly take or leave, though pretty much all squads tend to take a heavy weapon, and again fairly well balanced between missile launcher versus heavy bolter there. Finally, they also have their special rule allowing them to return to strategic reserve if they survive that long, and that could be fairly handy late game for some utility. Overall, pretty excellent unit. Having a low points cost means that they can be quite good for the trading game as well, forcing the opponents to expend something more valuable than they are to destroy them. Army lists often tend to take around 1 to 2 sets of 5. Then, and with really quite a big jump, in second place we have the Intercessor squad. They're 80 points for a squad of 5, 160 for a squad of 10. They almost always tend to appear in 5 units. It seems that a big 17 out of 25 use the standard Space Marine battle line here. The Intercessors do have some pretty reasonable damage of their own. The bolt guns getting to double fire when they focus down one target is pretty enormous. It means they should be able to cut through really quite a good number of horde units at range, as they'll have plenty of attacks in melee as well between the regular guys and the power fist. The main reason that one unit gets play in just about every list though is their objective secured rule. Sticky objectives is great to have on the home objective. It means that you can abandon it late game if you know the opponent can't get to it, and can just be helpful for being able to screen a bit more flexibly too. It means that a unit of 5 of them is rarely ever going to be a bad choice, particularly as their damage is solid enough against the optimal targets. At this level as well, it's probably worth just mentioning the Space Marine Heavy Armour as an honourable mention all of its own. If you counted flavours of Space Marine Gun Tank Heavy Hitter as just one unit class, they'd rank here, with 18 army lists using at least 2 gun tanks or dreadnoughts, usually 2 copies of the same type, and some go heavier than that. Because quite a few of these are at least relatively well balanced, it means that no one of them really sticks out too far above the rest, with things like Redemptor Dreadnoughts, Ballistus Dreadnoughts, Gladiator Lancers, Vindicators, or Repulsor Executioners. Most of those generally tend to be filling at least a somewhat similar role in the army, and perhaps a role that you might want to allocate a good chunk of points to, but not a vast amount. In any case, outside of Shadowmark Talon, Space Marine gun tanks, as a class of their own, could arguably be considered really quite a lot higher up this list than the individual placings would suggest. Taking the top spot in these competitive army lists, though, is the trusty Combi Lieutenant. Mr. Tyrannid Hunter from Leviathan himself is rarely ever a bad choice for a utility unit, and is pretty excellent for screening and board control and doing missions and things, even if he's not really going to do all that much damage. For your 70 points, you get the Space Marine Lone Operative. He's got 4 wounds with a 5+ feel no pain and stealth, so even when you can damage him, maybe just a little bit deceptively harder to take down than you might expect. He gets combi weapon shooting for maybe the odd devastating wound or so into infantry, and then paired combat blades in melee with AP 1 and damage 1, which might account for a few light infantry. He provides a potentially useful damage buff in the midboard, allowing you to reroll wound rolls of 1 against a target. But his really big deal one is his reactive move, meaning that you can move 6 inches if the enemy finishes within 9 inches of you. And that means that if he is somewhere near terrain, then he can probably just run to safety behind it, or potentially back away from a charge. It means to actually catch up and kill him, you have to get very, very close indeed. And that might very likely mean the opponent exposes themselves to being hit back by other units in your army, or being heroic intervened against or something. Generally there's just the one when they're taken in army lists, though I have seen occasional people use more. Certain enhancements can be good for them, either ones that can keep them a bit safer with some extra durability, or -1 command point debuffs like in Vanguard or Shadowmark. They can be a nice nuisance unit, sort of hanging around the front line or just behind it, being able to do secondary objectives and things while being sacrificial enough that it's not the end of the world if you lose him. And it's generally quite a big asset to the Space Marines for the objective scoring and board control style game. It seems that currently in tournament play, the Combi Weapon Lieutenant is the single most commonly used Space Marine unit. As mentioned at the start though, that's before we take into account the force of the Raven Guard. So now let's take a look at how that list changes if you add Shadowmark Talon into the data. For a quick refresh on the detachment, it gives you a -1 to hit at greater than 12 inches away and get the benefit of cover. If Aethon Shaan's on the board, then you can use the Return to Reserve stratagem for free. Their stratagems can support ranged damage dealers quite well. And they've got a particularly excellent first turn reserves arrival from Hunter's Instincts, and unusually that does work well with Rapid Ingress, and that basically means that that one's auto-includes to get a big scary unit into the fight early. Looking at a new set of 25 lists, including Shadowmark ones, as you can see the Shadowmark Talon lists make up around about half the sample here. As you can see the absolute auto-includes in the detachment being played 12 times. Aethon Shaan might well be in the running for perhaps single most valuable 40k character for the points cost right now. 85 points is great for a fast lone operative to start with, and he moves astonishingly fast at 14 inches. His melee damage is also surprisingly punchy. Mass Twin links damage 2 attacks with sustained hits too. He provides a charge buff somewhere on the board and can use Rapid Ingress and Heroic Intervention for free. All that would already make him pretty auto-include, never mind Shadowmark Talon, but there unlocking the free return to reserves just makes him absolutely god tier. If playing Raven Guard, then Kayvaan Shrike's pretty much no less auto-include though. A similar fighty jump captain with the Lightning Claw profiles, he gives jump intercessors OC2, and then often joins a big squad of either them or more likely Vanguard Veterans, and he gives them lone operative style protection, so you can't shoot them outside of 12 inches. That means that you have a really big scary fighty unit that a lot of the enemy just isn't really going to be able to engage very well. Then to round out the trio of auto-include jump characters, we have the Jump Captain. He's 75 points at the moment and gives you free stratagems for either Vanguard Veterans or Jump Intercessors, plus a bit of melee power and +1 strength on the charge. The reason he's auto-include in Shadowmark though is that you use him to take that Hunter's Instincts one, and that means that you can turn 1 Rapid Ingress a big scary unit of Vanguard Veterans with him at the helm, and guarantee that you can just absolutely go into something the opponent doesn't want to pretty much straight away. Overall pretty scary stuff between those three, and lots of Raven Guard striking from the shadows on jump packs. Then the Scouts seem to be at a similar sort of level of popularity, used by some but not all of the Shadowmark lists, and then otherwise going further up the list, there's other units that are basically auto-include or nearly so in Shadowmark Talon, but also got played in at least a few other Space Marine lists as well. Here we have the Devastator Centurions with 13 people playing them. Very slow moving but very shooty infantry, some of the best damage output that Space Marines have, each one having a twin-linked las cannon, a missile launcher that's fairly general purpose with its strength 9 and D3 shots, and their core rule allowing you to reroll hit rolls of 1 or anything against an objective marker. Their biggest weakness versus the various Space Marine gun tanks is their slow movement, but in Shadowmark Talon, return to reserves means that you can warp them across the board and come in from the side and then get a line of sight on something new. And they also like the rest of the stratagem support with the range damage buff and access to fall back and shoot now. Otherwise, and seemingly taken in 3 other lists besides the Shadowmark ones, there's the Inceptors, 120 points for 3 of them and 240 for 6. These guys are the drop close Primaris. Gravis armor stat lines with a 10-inch movement with their jump packs, and then a bunch of twin-linked pistol fire. Either assault bolters with some big sustained hits and 3 shots at strength 5 damage 2, or plasma exterminators with just the 2 shots apiece, but really quite a hard-hitting strength 8, AP 3 and damage 3 that can punch up against tough stuff well. Both of those loadouts are really quite viable, and it's really common to see a mix of the two within an army, as are both small squads and big squads of them. Perhaps a big squad to target with focal stratagems or shoot the Aethon moment target, maybe plasma being more tempting on the big squads, and assault bolters a bit more on the small squads where they might be doing more utility work, with the option to use their meteoric descent drop close rule to set out just outside of 6 inches and get to unusual positions and threaten units that might otherwise be safe. They could be a good one to pair with Aethon moment if they're going against something big and tough. Really like the Shadowmark return to reserve with so much freedom of where they deep strike, and they potentially could get spotted by Incursors to help with their accuracy. Then finally for Shadowmark units, we've got the Vanguard Veteran squad. Again, a big 15 list using these, and typically it's often 2 big squads of 10 per army list, one with Kayvaan Shrike and one with the Jump Captain to Rapid Ingress. Outside of that, they can still rival the Jump Intercessors fairly well, some lists taking small units of 5 of them as an alternative there. They're 95 points for 5, 190 for 10, and they get you Space Marines with Mass Strength 5, AP 1 and Damage 1 attacks, buffed on the charge with lethal hits to help them punch up against tougher stuff a bit. Against high saves, their damage can be a bit underwhelming versus the Jump Intercessors with their Mortal Wound impact hits, but they do have the advantage of either having a Storm Shield or a fancy pistol. Lists do seem to be really quite split as to which one gets used. Lots of people going for Mass Inferno pistols. They're 6-inch range, but really quite strong at strength 8, AP 4 and damage D3. And if you can get within 3 inches, then it could be D3 plus 2, easily enough to account for some seriously valuable elite infantry there. Otherwise though, the Storm Shields can make them harder to kill, giving them a 4+ invulnerable save. Both could work quite well, perhaps the Inferno pistols having just a little bit more draw to them. If you are almost certain that you're going to be getting the first strike, either via Shrike sort of pseudo-lone operative style rules or the rapid ingress captain. Either way, Vanguard Veterans certainly seem to be back on form in Shadowmark, or very appropriate for the Raven Guard of course, maybe a little frustrating for people who might not be too tempted by them until Games Workshop inevitably release the Primaris kit though. In any case, those are the Shadowmark units that break in and upend the top 10 if you include that detachment versus if you don't. Otherwise, aside from the scouts, the only other units that remain in the top 10 are the Jump Intercessors, Regular Intercessors, and the Combi Lieutenant. It seems Combi Lieutenant is extra popular in Shadowmark, some lists take the command point debuff on him, and Jump Intercessors seem to be a little bit unusually popular in Shadowmark as well. It certainly doesn't hurt when Kayvaan Shrike can give them OC2. In any case, that's just about it for this one. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Which Space Marine units have been seeing good success on the tabletops for you recently? I look forward to all your takes down in the comments below. Thanks to ObjectiveMarkers.com for sponsoring this one. You can find them linked down in the video description below. Check out their site if you'd like to take a look over their range of faction-specific fancy objective markers, quite clearly showing where the marker is on the board and also adding a little bit of theme while being on a clear thing to allow you to see the battlefield below it. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.